Hello, it's me back again, and I am now going to talk about Act 2 of Romeo and Juliet. First, scenes 1 and 2. So, I'm going to give you basically 3 details or so from each scene. I think scene 2 has 4 because it is such an important scene. And at the end of Act 2, we are going to do another paper similar to the one we did for Act 1, but this time I want you to base all of your answers on these videos. And so everything that you write about Act 2 should come from these videos that I have posted. And so, first of all, I want to talk about scene 1. So scene 1 opens and, we have just left the party and Romeo has fallen in love with Juliet and vice versa, right? She has, loved him as well. And so he's very happy. And so he decides he's not going to go home. He's going to sneak into the garden. And so that's, one of the first important details that we have from that first scene. And then Benvolio and Mercutio are looking for him, and now they don't know that he's fallen in love with Juliet, right? They think he's still in love with Rosaline. So Mercutio is still making fun of him and saying, oh, Romeo, he's such a lover, right? He so in love with Rosaline, who doesn't love him back and who doesn't want to get married. And so he's just pining away. And so Mercutio is yelling and just sort of saying all these ridiculous things and just making fun of Romeo for being, such a hopeless lover of Rosaline, because they have no idea that he's now fallen in love with Juliet. And so Benvolio says, listen, man, he doesn't want to be found. We might as well go home and go to bed because it's late and I'm tired. And so, they decide to leave. And we see them, being good friends because they did go look for him. Mercutio does give him sort of a hard time, but, sometimes friends do that, right? They joke around, they tease each other. And so that is scene 1. Scene 2, of course, is the famous garden scene, which in the original, old in the original version is on a balcony, and they would have used the balcony in the Globe Theater to do this scene. And they certainly keep that same sort of idea in the older movie, in the 70s version of the film, the Franco Zeffirelli version, where they do have a balcony and Juliet comes out and she gives her speech. Now, some people were a little bit confused. They thought that the newer version from the 90s used different language, but it doesn't. In some cases, they've shortened down the speeches a little bit, but all of the words are from Shakespeare's original text. They didn't, in some modern versions, they will change the language, but they didn't do that for this one. They actually kept the original language, they kept the original text, and they just sort of shortened it in place. And so, providing shorter statements is sometimes easier to understand, sometimes easier to follow, to rely more on visuals and less on words. But that's a filmmaker, different filmmakers make different choices. So let me just check my notes. So, of course, at the beginning of this scene, Romeo sees Juliet. She comes out to the balcony, and this is where he compares her to the sun, right? And he says, what light through yonder window breaks? It's Juliet, and she is the sun, right? And so basically this idea that she is so bright and beautiful, that she could outshine the moon, and the moon is jealous of her beauty, right? That she's so beautiful, she could make the day come because she's so bright and beautiful. And so that's that idea there. Now, Juliet, of course, she starts to speak just to herself, right? She's just talking to herself, and that's where she says, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? Now, sometimes people misunderstand this line and they think she's saying, where are you, Romeo? But actually she's saying, why are you called Romeo? Why does that have to be your name? Why couldn't you not be Romeo Montague, basically? Because here she's talking about their families being in a fight, right? So their families are feuding, and so she's very upset because she's finally fallen in love, right? She doesn't want to marry Paris. She wants to marry Romeo. And they can't get married because their families are fighting. They're in a feud. They don't like each other. And she knows that her family would never agree to let her marry him. And so she's just talking about how she wishes he wasn't a Montague. Then she goes on to talk about how if he could deny his family, right? And this was a thing that people sometimes did. They would basically, they would swear, against their family, and they would leave their family behind and sort of willingly, become no longer a member of their family. And so she says, deny thy father and refuse thy name. And so she's saying that's one thing Romeo could do. Or she says if he doesn't want to do that, then if he just swears that he'll love her, she'll no longer be a Capulet. And so she gives this suggestion that one or both of them give up their names, basically, and no longer sort of swear allegiance to their families. Now, this, of course, they've spent, 5 minutes together. So depending on, how you feel about this, whether you think it's worth sort of rejecting your whole family to run off and love someone that you've only known for 5 minutes, I guess is it really does require you to believe in love at first sight, right? If you really have to believe that love at first sight is a real thing, and that, it would be worth it to never see your family again, to go off with this person that you've just met. You would have to believe that love at first sight was really real. Now, of course, they finally speak, and he comes out and he speaks to her, and they, make a plan. They swear they love each other, and depending on who's staging it, sometimes they kiss a bunch more times. Romeo might climb up the balcony and kiss her a few more times. Sometimes not, sometimes it depends on who is staging it. And so that they swear they love each other. And Juliet says, if you're honorable and you want to marry me, come back, listen, I'll send you a message tomorrow and we can make a plan. And so that's what they decide to do. They decide to make a plan to, get married, and Romeo's going to go off and make arrangements, and Juliet will send him a message the next day and he can let her know what to do. And they have already decided, again, after knowing each other for one night, to run off and get married. Now the couple of lines I asked you to look at, one was parting is such sweet sorrow, right? And everybody did a pretty good job with that one. This idea that, they've been together, which is why it's sweet, but now they have to leave each other, which is why it's sorrowful, which is why it's sad. So that was a pretty good job that people did with that. And then that's pretty much the end of scene 2. So I will be back in another video to talk about scenes 3 and 4.